Hello and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Rails to Trails Conservancy's Urban Pathways Initiative. My name is Stephen Miller. I'm Urban Pathways Coordinator here at RTC, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Today's topic is trail user counts, and we have a great panel for you. First is Jennifer Donlon. She's also Planning and Design's Project Manager for the National Bicycle and Pedestrian Documentation Project. She joins us today from Berkeley, California. Eric Oberg is Manager of Trail Development for Rails to Trails Conservancy's Midwest Regional Office. He joins us from Ohio today. David Patton is the Bicycle and Pedestrian Planner for Arlington County, Virginia, and he's sitting here with me in Washington, D.C. Carl Knock is Manager of Trail Development for Rails to Trails Conservancy's Northeast Regional Office. Unfortunately, he's unable to join us today, as is Mel Huie from Oregon Metro. So what I'll be doing is an abridged version of Carl's presentation. With that, let's get started. I'm going to pass the mic over to Jennifer.
Hello, everyone. This is Jennifer at Alta Planning. I hope you can all hear me and see my screen. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the National Bicycle and Pedestrian Documentation Project. I will go over what the National Documentation Project is, what we've accomplished, how a National Documentation Project can help your effort, and how you can use count data, what other communities are doing. So what is the National Documentation Project? It's a pro bono effort led by Alta Planning and Design with support from ITE, which is the Institute for Transportation Engineers. We've been doing this since about 2003, spearheading the effort to collect bicycle and pedestrian count data as well as survey data. What we're hoping to do is fulfill the need for in-depth analysis of why people are walking and biking, and also to understand needs. The objective of the National Documentation Project is consistent data so that we can compare one community's counts to another, so that you can have year-over-year consistent counts so you can measure activity in your community. We also want to have open access data. Currently, this is an unfunded project, and we're doing this pro bono. We are searching for funding sources so that we can create an open database for sharing with communities. And then also we want to share research. We're looking for folks who are researching counts and surveys and understanding use, and how we'd like to share that with the communities. So why do we need the National Documentation Project? We started this in 2003 because there wasn't a consistent data collection method. Folks were counting very differently with screen line counts or intersection counts, different times of the year, and with inconsistent counts, it's really hard to analyze what's going on. We're also encouraging folks to do counts because we want more support for non-motorized funding, and counts are a great way to get support for your grants. Grantees really want to give money to projects that have a good data behind it. And then also we hope to use counts for forecasting and modeling so that we can estimate future use or annual use. So the National Documentation Project, since 2003, we've had over 100 organizations and agencies that have sent us data from over 600 count locations. We've developed extrapolation figures so that if you have a 2-hour manual count, we can estimate it out to an annual activity level. We've done some related projects. We work for Caltrans, which is the California State DOT, on the Seamless Travel Project, which is a 2-year count and survey effort in San Diego County to develop a model to predict activity levels. And we've also put together for you on our website some documents that you can use to go out there and do your counts, training manuals, count forms, example surveys. So part of what we've done with the National Documentation Project is set up consistent dates and times for counts. We recommend that counts are done 4 times a year. September is the primary month, but we also encourage folks to do counts in May, July, and as well as January. This is year-round if you're doing manual counts. And we recommend that folks do 1 weekday and 1 Saturday at peak hour count time, peak hour count activity. And the chart here that you see on the right is a comparison of what we did for our San Diego count effort. We compared our counts from the National Documentation Project to what was happening in San Diego. And what that shows is that we really need count data from around the country so we can better understand seasonal factors, and even when we get down on the lower level, regional factors. So the National Documentation's count methodology is screen line counts, as you can see here on the left. So a screen line count is an imaginary line across your path or your trail, and counting all folks who cross that imaginary line. There are other types of counts. These are intersection counts. These are better for understanding exposure and safety, but not so much for predicting volumes or activity. So how can the National Documentation Project help you? Well, we put together, and they're available on our website, training presentations, both for your staff and for your volunteers if you're doing manual counts. We provided manual count forms. If you're going with automatic counts, we have an overview of automatic count technologies up available on our website. And we've also developed some extrapolation factors. So our training presentations, here are some screenshots from the ones that are posted up on our website. Going through the details of counting different users, you might imagine that conducting manual counts may seem easy, but it's not always. What if you have a parent in a stroller? Is that counted as 1 or 2? And ultimately, you want to be counting the number of users. So you would count children as well as adults, and you count everybody. We also encourage folks when they're conducting manual counts to differentiate between the different types of users. So if you have somebody on rollerblades, they would be counted differently than somebody who is walking or somebody who is biking. We've also put together standard count forms to help you out. So basic information up at the top, the location, the time period, the date, the weather condition. The weather condition is pretty important for understanding that it might affect your count activity on that particular day. We also have an overview of automatic count technologies. I believe that David will go into his experience with the automatic count from EcoCounter. There's quite a few different types of count technologies. The infrared is probably the most appropriate for these types of counts. And then they can be mounted differently. On the left here is an example of an automatic counter mounted to a fence along a trail. And also you can see below there are counters that can be put on sidewalks. And then on the right we have in-street or in-pavement counters to count bicycles. And we recently put together, and this is up on our website, bikepadocumentation.org. We put this up this week. We've had the extrapolation figures and how-to up on our website for about a year, and we realized that it would be a lot easier just to put up an Excel spreadsheet that does all the work for you. You just have to input your specific data about when your count is, the number of people you counted, the count time, and what type of district is it, and what's your climate zone. Is it a hot summer, a moderate climate? So this is new, and that's up on the website. Please download it if you'd like to test it out. So how do communities use count data? I think it's really important for communities and trail organizations to count and count on a regular basis. One, to understand current use. Then to forecast demand for existing facilities or proposed facilities within your community. If you want to build a trail and you have a nearby trail, can you estimate how many folks will use it? Then also to support grant applications. Grantees love to know how many people are using trails or pathways in the area, and this can really justify funding your project. And then also design. Design is pretty important. You can see here on the next slide, this is an example of a count we did in the Northeast, and what we found along this trail network where there are particular segments that have much higher use. And what that tells us is that the standard 8-foot paved path really doesn't accommodate most users. So for planning purposes, where areas where you know from counts that you have a higher use, you want to design a wider path. Generally, for planning purposes, if you conduct regular counts, 120 people per hour is the standard width. The more folks that you have on your trail or your path, the wider the trail should be. So who's counting? There are a lot of cities that are conducting regular counts, and I encourage every community out there who's participating today to conduct counts and conduct counts on a regular basis. And feel free to go to the National Documentation website to get information or email us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer, so much. Right now we're going to move on to Eric Oberg from Rails to Trails Conservancy's Midwest Regional Office. And it looks like we were able to get Mel Huie from Oregon Metro to join us, so he'll be going after Eric. Eric, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm going to talk about traffic's infrared counters. These are the counters that RTC has been using for quite a few years. They're also they've been around for a while. The latest generation, they made a couple great improvements. The counters themselves haven't changed a lot, but the way that you can download data has changed quite a bit. These are the third generation, thus the G3 that you see there of Traffic's infrared counters. The greatest improvement they've made from generation 2 to 3 is the downloading dock, which is what you see on the left side there. And whereas in the past with these counters you had to take out a laptop or a PDA of some type with a USB cord to download your data, you can now just take this dock out into the field, download all your data. It gives you different, all kinds of different information from your traffic counter. Gives you battery status if there's any sort of problems at all. It gives you that information through all the different colored lights on the dock. But these are the latest Traffic's passive infrared counters. So how would you set these up? They've got about a 20-foot distance accuracy. Obviously, you want to keep them well hidden and or well secured. I would suggest both if you're using these. We try to hide ours and secure ours. We've built some secure boxes for these out of electrical boxes and padlocks. And there's some great information out there for how to. Very simple to build, but looking for fencing, you can see some different examples of ways we've done it. Trees, you name it. There's an old piece of railroad infrastructure there on the left side of that. Shows how we hid it in a box and shot the eye through the hole there. So there's a myriad of ways to set these up. You just need to realize that 20-foot distance accuracy. Other things, some of the pitfalls of this technology. Now this isn't a straight line beam that is reading a cut to the beam. It's reading thermal readouts. It's something warm, something hot. So to tell you the honest truth, it's going to count deer. If you have a lot of deer on your trail and you have this set at the right height, it'll count that. It'll also count that if you have a tree within that 20-foot distance accuracy or some other vegetation that gets direct sunlight and really warms up and you get a little bit of a breeze and it's moving, it could detect that. So you need to think about a lot of those sorts of things with these counters. The other thing it does is if you have really heavy use on your trail, sidewalk, wherever it is you're counting, and you have people that are walking 2 or 3 abreast, it will probably only count that as one user. So those are some of the pitfalls, but some of the great things about it is it's counting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and uses very little battery power. AA batteries. I know of folks that have had these out for up to 6 months in remote locations, not able to check them, and gone back, and they still have battery power. So these things are durable, long-lasting, and they count 24 hours a day. Some reasons for getting these types of counts. Obviously, it adds quantifying data to show the need for more construction. Allows your planning agencies, probably a lot of you on this call, to gauge where, when, and how to continue building your trail or your bike ped infrastructure. Where's your heaviest use? It helps justify costs, obviously, if you can go in and show show decision makers how many people are out there using it, having the quantifiable numbers instead of just anecdotally saying we know they're out there means a lot. And for those of you that have not heard yet of the new motorized mobility devices regulations that began March 15th, getting a good count can be one of the tools for you to start coming up with a policy on how you're going to deal with these new compliance regulations. Getting a good count will go a long way towards coming up with those new standards. Now, what do they tell you? What can you use these? What can you get out of these Traffic's counters? I mean, it really is a handy tool for a lot of different reasons. There are so many different pie graphs and bar charts, bar graphs and charts and figures that you can get out of these counters and manipulate through the Traffic software. You can compare different sites, obviously, on the left side there, showing 3 different sites along one trail. Where's you most use? The hours of the day. It's a wonderful tool for seeing when you have use. So you can really see commuter spikes. The one that I'm showing there, there's a couple spikes there during your commuting hours. It's really handy to show that when you're talking about urban pathways and transportation corridors, to really prove that point that people are using this as a transportation corridor. And some of these accounts, we really are seeing seeing commuter spikes. Days of the week, when are people using it? Things like that. And like I said, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, these things are on and counting, and it gives you just an amazing that array of data. You can also put in different filters. If you're counting on a loop trail, it'll allow you to filter and divide everything by 2, because obviously if someone going out has to come back. There's a lot of different features like that built into the software. You can really extrapolate data in so many ways with these. They've been a wonderful tool. And I don't want to talk for too long because I know we'll have a lot of questions, but that's a basic overview of the traffic's passive infrared trail counters. Wonderful tools, and if you get a chance to use them, we certainly recommend it.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Right now we're going to go over to David Patton. David is from Arlington County, Virginia, and he'll be able to present on that county's bike and pedestrian counts. David, the floor is all yours.
The slide before this just had my name on it and introduced me as from Arlington County. Arlington County is a very small jurisdiction just across the river from Washington, D.C. We're the smallest self-governing county in the country, and we have the beginnings of what we hope will be a significant bicycle and pedestrian counting program going on. We're an urban county, very dense, by far the densest locality in the state of Virginia, but we have quite a significant trail network. So we have begun our concentrated counting efforts on our trail network. So Eric and Jennifer have touched on some of these issues already, but why are we doing this? We live in an area of contested space. Everybody wants a little piece of territory for bus stops, for cars, for parking, for traffic, for development. Partly, we're defensive in a way. We're claiming the right for bicycles and pedestrians to have a share of space. I'm going to say a bit about historical trends because by training I'm a historical geographer and there's some interesting things to learn from the past. We also use counts to evaluate the effectiveness of our promotion efforts. We, in addition, always have an eye on safety, and exposure and use data are important for determining rates of crashes, fatalities, etc. And in a pointed way, we have one of the nation's largest, or maybe the nation's largest, bike sharing system, which is a new venture, been underway for about 6 months now. And so now we're going to be able to track the growth of Capital Bike Share as it expands. So we've been evaluating some different technologies. We have a small network of installed equipment now, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we've learned. But first, a little detour into history. Other places in the world have been doing comprehensive census of traffic for quite some time. And about 90 years ago, the public safety officials in London decided they needed to get a handle on what was going on in the city streets. There were lots of new kinds of transportation taking place, in addition to a legacy of horse-drawn traffic and lots of pedestrians, lots of bicycles. So for a number of years, Scotland Yard and the police from the City of London, the square mile, fielded a large number of police officers and counted about 100 locations for 12 hours on a given day in July. And we can learn quite a bit from that. But just from a historical perspective, one of the things it tells us is that undertaking was considered important enough to put salaried officials out in the street to do it. This was at a time of virtually nothing in the way of dedicated bicycle facilities, let alone much in the way of traffic control devices or even the beginnings of the traffic engineering profession. It was a dangerous place. Injuries and fatalities were high. And some of the findings from that period are very interesting. Just at a cursory level, these are snippets from one year's report from 1933. We looked at the very highest traffic location, which is Hyde Park Corner in central historic London, and about 10% of the total number of vehicles were bicycles. At another location, Holborn Circus, which is in the city near the British Museum, about 20% of traffic was bicycles. And in one of the urban villages out in the western part of Greater London, up to 35 and over % of all the vehicle traffic on the streets were bicycles. And we have nothing equivalent in the United States that I'm aware of this kind of record. One of the things it tells us, just spending a little time with this information, is that the places with the highest numbers of bicycles are not the same as the places with the highest percentage of bicycles in traffic. And this is something that Jennifer was alluding to. We won't be able to determine where those locations are without a robust set of data. Another thing it tells us, with a little bit of digging, is that these sorts of one-day counts are incredibly dependent on weather. This published report from 1933 recounts the 5 previous July days and what their weather conditions were, and they were showery, fine, rainy from 5 to 8, and showery. So it's kind of a crapshoot out there what your weather is. So that leads us to wanting to have automatic equipment that's out there working 24/7. Another good reason to do this is because Portland does it. Portland does a really good job of it. Not alone, of course. Jennifer mentioned some other localities that do a really good job, and they derive great data from it. And if we're going to make arguments about safety and exposure and safety in numbers, you have to begin the data collection at some point so that you can refer to it in the historical sense. And of course, the Portland data has led the Portland bicycle planning and transportation professionals to generate some really robust theoretical approaches to what we're all doing. We're trying to grow active transportation, and there's that huge slice, 60% of the population that's interested in this, but they're concerned for their safety, convenience, etc. So a little bit about our history in Arlington. We do participate in Jennifer's program, but in a modified way. We, and Jennifer, I still haven't submitted our data to you, and we have reasons for that. We send volunteers out in the field. We've done it 9 times so far, and we've dialed this back to doing it once a year now. We're going to take part in the primary September count, but we're really going to rely on our automatic counting equipment for the bulk of generating our baseline. But when we send volunteers out, we're also going to be observing gender of those riders, those pedestrians, which direction they're going on our facilities, helmet use, because it's a very easy thing to track. And we're building a database to hold all of that, all those results together with our automated results. Still not ready to go, and that's why I'm not quite ready to share it with the National Clearinghouse. It would be much more useful when we get it up and running. And we are adding, in sympathy with the survey part of the documentation project, we're adding bike and ped specific questions to resident surveys that are being undertaken by the county. In the realm of our automatic counting equipment, we began an evaluation of tube counters. We have one installation that is a piezo counter, which is essentially it's an analog of tube counters. We found it to be a very reliable technology. Doesn't count pedestrians. So we do use a combination of inductive loops, which count bikes, and passive infrared detectors, which count pedestrians and bikes. So this is our first tube counter installation, or actually these are 2 different installations, and our technician is a little dismayed that he's not being able to count those pedestrians. But the data we got out of a few weeks of experiment showed us some very regular patterns that we wanted to know more about. Eric mentioned the commuter spikes. At this particular facility, we have very clear morning and afternoon peak hours. This is a place called the Custis Trail, for those of you who might know it in Arlington. It's a favorite commuter route for cyclists and pedestrians to get to Metro and to get to DC. It parallels I-66 through the county, and it's a very popular facility. So on the basis of these sorts of results, we began investing in some installations of the eco-counter equipment. We now have 4 installations of their equipment that are combined inductive loop for counting bikes and a passive infrared detector which counts all the warm bodies passing by, and then a little data logger that does a calculation and gives discrete totals for the bikes and the pets. There are a few glitches that come up in operating this kind of thing. On the left, you see the most extensive vandalism we've suffered so far, which is somebody stuck a couple little broken twigs into the eyeballs of our sensor and effectively blinds it. We can't tell how many bodies are going by and in what direction they're traveling. We still count the bikes when this happens. But we discovered that in a day and went out and pulled the plugs on those things, and it worked fine. On the right, you see a trail crew inadvertently covered up the eyeballs of the same counter, and we discovered that after a couple of days. They were responding to a tree that crashed and fell into the trail. They didn't realize what that post was doing there. They wrapped their caution tape around it and blinded us. The picture in the center is one of our locations. We installed it in very early December when the ground was frozen hard. Realized 6 weeks later that, oh, this is it doesn't drain very well. The equipment worked perfectly right through this. So it's a good selling point for the, not that I'm selling eco-counter equipment, but it worked perfectly right through that. And we are going back and designing a drainage containment for that site. This is a screenshot from the website that displays our data. And in the question session afterwards, we can revisit this and do a little live demo of this. The new generation of eco-counter equipment is modem enabled. You pay a little premium for it at the time of purchase. You pay a cell phone subscription for each of the counters out in the field, and it works great. We had a little bit of, learning curve to get up and running with it, but it's not exactly real time. The modem downloads the data twice a day to a central server. It's available on the web directly after that. It's pretty flexible. The basic website is in French. EcoCounter is a French company, so there are funny little translation concerns, but it's really working very well. We're going to roll out more counters. By the end of June this year, which is the end of our fiscal year, we're going to have another dozen in the field, and including, I think it's the blue dots on that map, will be our first in-pavement street-located counters. And those will be only the bicycle counter product called the Belt Loop from EcoCounter. And they reliably detect bicycles from mixed traffic. We will be installing these in places that have bike lanes, so we have pretty well channelized bicycle use anyway. Doesn't pick up motor vehicles, it discounts them as part of the background of the metallic signal in the range of the equipment. We have very high hopes that these will provide us information we don't currently have. And then snow white. So what are we doing with this information? And here in DC, we have a very good case study. Last year, December, February 10, we had a huge snowstorm, and you'll see that chart there with the magenta and purple lines. That was a year's worth of data from our Custis Trail Counter that we released to the public for discussion. And influential blogger here in DC who runs a website called Wash Cycle wrote it up. And one of his findings was that since it's clear that cyclists and pedestrians are a greater than zero share of the commuter traffic, they deserve a greater than zero share of snow clearing resources. Because what the chart shows is that for almost an entire month, that portion of the Custis Trail was unusable. It hadn't been cleared of snow. We had 3 or 4 feet of snow on the ground. It turned to ice. People couldn't ride their bikes on it. People couldn't walk safely across it. They had to go on metro. They had to drive cars. They had to ride the bus, whatever. So this is an argument that has taken hold and gained traction in our bureaucracy. We haven't exactly extracted a pledge to clear the trails yet, but it is an issue of equity that is having some influence. And then just another couple of shots of data visualization. It's clear that some of our trails are used for transportation purposes. This is a year's worth of data for the Custis Trail. Again, averaged out, and we have clear afternoon and morning peaks. And it's even more apparent when you separate weekdays and weekends what's going on. Is that this is a commuter facility primarily during the week, and it has a different purpose on the weekend. It's used by people for fitness, for recreation, for all those things that we love our trails for. So I'm going to sign off at that point, and we'll take this up if there are any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, David. like I mentioned earlier, luckily it looks like we have Mel who's able to join us. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. I'm Mel Huie. I work on regional trails for Metro, which is in Portland, Oregon. And we've been doing our regional trail counts for 3 years. And I have a short PowerPoint presentation. But my assigned task was to talk about the use of volunteers. So I wanted to go over the highlights of our volunteer usage first. So just for your information, we covered a 4-county area, which included Clark County and Washington State, just across the Columbia River. And we covered more than 100 trail count sites. And we had used more than 100 citizen volunteers who were coordinated by 10 professional staff. We could not possibly do the program without these volunteers. And just to let you know, Metro is also using some automated counters year-round. It was interesting to hear David Patton's presentation because we're more in the kind of beginning stages. We don't have the information sent to a computer. And we are generally using infrared counters rather than more of the smart options. But the city of Portland is using some of the programs you mentioned, the tubes and some electronic counters. And I think they're starting to do inductive loops. They do have them on streets, but not on any trails. No one has put inductive loops into trails. Back on the volunteers, we follow the national protocol that Jennifer Donlon mentioned, teaching all of our citizens. And the nice thing is we have repeat volunteers over the 3 years. So I don't know if the other agencies speaking rely on volunteers, but I'm sure they do. For example, last September, one weekend day over 2 hours, we counted more than 18,000 trail users in the Portland, Vancouver metro area. And interestingly enough, the split was close to 50-50 bike-ped, and it was still a percentage more males. Males were more of the bikers, and females were more of the walkers. And we're getting our nonprofit organizations involved with the 10 government agencies like the Bicycle Transportation Alliance, the Willamette Pedestrian Coalition. We're going to be expanding our program in 2011. And of course, we have no money to do any of this, so we're kind of doing it with part-time staff, just adding it to our workload and using all of our volunteers. So I'll just quickly go through this slideshow. So I think most of this you've heard from Jennifer, the first one. And it was interesting hearing the history of census counts going all the way back to London. So again, it's our 3rd year here. We're committed to a 4th year, and hopefully Metro will be doing this with our partners for the next few years ahead, because the information collected is being used by agencies for grant applications, presentations to their city councils and park boards to secure more funding for trails. So here are the kind of areas we tried to cover with our local partners, because Metro is the regional government for Portland, Oregon area. We have 25 cities, 3 counties, and we work with Clark County, Vancouver, even though they're in a separate state. So we did look at key regional trails, key intersections, trails that are close to transit, in mixed-use developments, and what our local partners want. So we try to repeat each site so we have a trend analysis over 3 years. So again, here's the pedestrian survey that the national group recommends. So here's kind of how we use the data: demand projections, It's a little harder because we have a whole group of techies here at Metro looking at traffic projections, so they're going to start to work on bicycle and possibly pedestrian projections. So here's a chart. I hope you can see it very well, but it kind of shows other agencies: Indianapolis, Rhode Island, San Diego. So as you know, Portland, Oregon is famous for people walking and riding. So we did have various weather patterns over the last 3 years. In 2010, September, we had a significant amount of rain. And just for the national group to know, some of the dates we didn't go with the exact recommended dates because school starts later in Oregon than back east, I think. And there's a significant other biking activities in September which take away from the trail users and our volunteer base. And that's really important, the volunteer base. And just to let you know, the training is done consistently by Metro and our 9 local partners following the national guidelines. So each partner has their own training session which Metro oversees, but our program is very locally controlled, but each of our local partners communicates with Metro staff via email, and we meet about 2 times a year sharing information. And we also do surveys with our local partners to improve volunteer recruitment, volunteer training. So once the data is collected, we want to make sure we have good data from the counts, and we do intercept surveys as well. And that's a little tougher because it's harder to get bicyclists to stop. So it takes kind of an assertive volunteer to stop the bicyclist, because our surveys are more skewed to pedestrians because they are willing to stop. And we also do appreciations for our volunteers. That's very important. During our training sessions, we provide pizza and refreshments, and we have some bike gear freebies, and we have an annual volunteer appreciation dinner for volunteers who put a lot of hours in. Plus, I've recruited 2 very trained volunteers to work with me and Robert Spurlock here at Metro to do data entry, data analysis, and to post the results on our website. In the past, we've concentrated on getting good data collection, and the data entry into Excel is very, very time consuming. So we're developing an Excel spreadsheet that has a fail-safe way of entering data, so you can't put in the wrong letter because we've coded everything into letters or numbers for data entry. One thing I want to propose to all the other panelists and attendees, can we figure out a more efficient data entry system and how we can query information from the data? We have like 10 notebooks full of data that we've scanned into our system, and we've entered it into many, many Excel spreadsheets. And now I've learned how to do some queries from Excel, like how many trail users we counted, etc. So these are just kind of charts that showed some of the information. And the conclusions: significant weekday variation and weekend. During the weekend, more of the people are recreational users, but during the weekday counts, the Portland area has a significant amount of bike commuters. So that's the end of my presentation.
All right, I'm going to switch over and do a presentation, an abridged version of Carl Knock's presentation. Carl is the Manager of Trail Development for Rails to Trails Conservancy's Northeast region, This may be able to answer a few of the questions that everyone has about some more detailed information about trail users when you survey them. Studies of the economic impact of trails, they're really a powerful tool, and you can use it to augment your counts and help gain political support, enhance some funding requests, attract new businesses by proving that there is an audience for the business, and also revitalize existing businesses along a trail. So the focus here is really on what's the economic value of a trail to the surrounding area, and how do you calculate that data through both trail counts of just the pure number of people using a trail and surveys of those people and how they're using the trail and what they're spending nearby. There are two components to this type of survey that our Northeast office does. Trail users are counted using active infrared counters, like the ones that Eric spoke about earlier in the webinar, and then they're surveyed using survey boxes you can see in the photo in the lower left. They can pick up a survey. It contains a broad variety of questions about their origin, their destination, trail use habits that they have, spending habits they have, opinions they have of this particular trail and the experience they have on it, and more. They put those survey responses in a box, and then we collect those responses and use that data. So you can see the map here, for example, shows where the counters are located. In the red numbers, those are the infrared counters we've located along a trail for a survey. And then the green boxes are where the survey boxes are located to get as broad of a cross-section of trail users as we can. So when RTC conducts a trail user survey, one of the more important aspects is asking trail users what they spend on various items in conjunction with their trail use. So that things like food, potentially lodging, bike supplies, like parts. So then we combine this information with trail user data to get an estimate on the average annual trail user spending. So let's take a look at some numbers. These are from the York County Heritage Rail Trail in Pennsylvania. The official opening of the trail was in August of 1999. It runs 20 miles long. And consumer spending on items including beverages, sandwiches, and ice cream even has increased over time, you can see, since the trail opened in '99. One of the potential reasons for that big jump in from 2001 to 2004 was that there was a changeover in the types of restaurants that were located along the trail. A couple of the restaurants, one was it was called Trail Mix Sandwich Shop, and then it became more of a sit-down restaurant. And then similarly, a pizzeria became more of a sit-down restaurant, and so their receipts increased accordingly. So over the 5 years that the studies were conducted, spending on items such as bicycles, supplies, and clothing hasn't varied more than $30. So we're showing that trail users are engaging in discretionary spending along this rail trail. Oftentimes, in political debates about deciding whether or not to build a trail, the issue is framed that building a trail is an expense and not an investment. And these economic impact studies can help prove that trails really are an investment. The Heritage Rail Trail in Pennsylvania took $3.4 million to develop. Annual maintenance for the trail is approximately $150,000, but user spending associated with the trail now exceeds $5 million each year. So just in terms of the economic benefit in new business formation, business revitalization, and trail user spending, it's more than repaid the initial and ongoing investment for this trail. So if we look at some more numbers, these are for other trails in Pennsylvania. RTC has conducted these types of surveys on trails throughout the Northeast, in Pennsylvania and New Jersey primarily. And when you multiply these average daily expenditures for trail users by the tens of thousands of visits that these trails get each year, it's not difficult to see that these little drips on food and drink really add up to a significant economic impact. And we're able to get those accurate numbers through these trail counts. Many communities, grew and prospered around the commerce that was brought by railroads, and rail trails and trails in general can serve not only for kind of destination tourism, where folks will go out and rent a bike and stay in a hotel. That's significant economic impact. But even local trails, even for the recreational uses, there's often a significant economic benefit for a family spending a day on a trail to the local area. If you want to take a look at full reports, and I recommend that you do, they're available on our website at railstotrails.org, and in the wrap-up email that I'll be sending out to everyone, it will include links to some of these reports. It includes the questions that we asked, which include age, spending for the day, home zip code, where they accessed the trail, how they got to the trail, the distance that they're covering on the trail. And we have these reports for like I mentioned, trails throughout New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So with that, we've wrapped up the presentation section of our webinar. I'm going to switch right now over to just the closing slide. And we have some questions that are already kind of in the hopper. So what I'm going to do is pull some of them out right now and direct them to the appropriate folks. So we have a question that says, what do counts tell us about the use by type of facility as identified in the Astro Bike book? For example, what's used more, bike lanes, multi-use trails? I'm going to hand this question over to David, and he can give you a better idea because they do both in-street and off-street counting.
I'll take a first stab at this, and I welcome other folks to get in if they want. In our case in Arlington, we see quite, in the places where we count the trails, we see quite a dominance of bicycle users at most times. And this is interesting because it has repercussions for our management. Most of our trails are managed by our parks department, and when we can show that the trail use is pretty clearly a transportation use of people using that to get to work or to get to their errands, it sets up a bit of a tension inside our management about whose budget should be tapped to pave and sign and take care of that. On the other hand, our pedestrian numbers are highest on some of our urban sidewalks. We're a very urban location. We have stations that are part of the Washington, D.C. Metro rail system. We have more than 1,000 pedestrians an hour on some of our urban sidewalks, which is way more than we ever see on the trail. So it's a mix. And we don't yet have any automatic equipment on our bike lanes, on our street network. We will be installing the first of those in the next couple of months. But as a result of our manual surveys, or manual counts which we've done, the bike lane numbers have never approached the highs of our trail numbers. So that lends some support to the folks that say, who make the facilities argument. If you build separate facilities to cyclists, you will see a bump in usage. And that's clearly been part of Portland's approach, the build it and they will come approach, and we certainly see that echoing out and supported by our count numbers.
All right, I'm going to open that question up to all of our panelists. Does anyone want to jump in on that question regarding whether counts have shown which types of facilities, cycle tracks, on-street bike lanes, or trails are used more?
This is Jennifer. I'd just like to add that we're just beginning to understand on-street bicycle counts, and they're just beginning to be installed, the in-pavement loop detectors. And I think, like David said, right now we don't have as high numbers for on-street bicycle lanes as we do for trails, but I think part of the issue is that we also don't have complete on-street bike networks. So the bike lanes aren't serving needs from one destination to the other destination, and we're getting there. But I don't think we have enough data to really understand which is preferred, although off-street tends to be preferred as trail system.
Great. Mel or Eric, do you guys want to jump in, or should we just move on to the next question?
Yeah, the majority of my experience, all my experience really has been off-street facilities, so I can't make a comparison.
This is Mel. Most of the pedestrians we counted were off-street trails for safety, and there was a length, because people like to walk from A to B that's long, or we have a lot of loop trails in our downtown area for users during lunch. I just wanted to add that most of our pedestrian counts were from off-street trails.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Let's move on to another question. I'm going to direct this one towards Jennifer, actually. The question is electronic count data such as the ones that Eric described being included in the National Pedestrian and Bicycle Documentation Project data?
Yes, we are collecting automatic count data, and I actually have contacted David, I think once or twice asking for his data, though I know that it's not ready yet. We do work with a lot of the communities that are doing automatic counts, and we also have close relationships with most of the manufacturers who produce these count equipment. So we are collecting that data, and we do have a good amount that we are hoping to get some more.
Great, thank you. I have a question I'm going to direct towards Eric. This question is, what other considerations for conducting counting on hiking trails are there as opposed to bike ped trails? So if you're in a more woody environment where the trail may not be paved, what types of considerations should you take into account?
I think obviously, like I pointed out, the vegetation, making sure you don't have something that can create that heat signature and then move with a little bit of wind to trigger a count. So looking for that vegetation within the line of sight. One easy way to deal with that is point your counter towards the ground. On a hiking trail, you're usually not talking about an 8 to 12 foot wide trail. It's usually a much shorter or skinnier tread there. So you can point your counter down towards the ground from 3 or 4 feet high in the air, and maybe that'd be one technique to make sure you're not counting warmed up vegetation. The other thing, depending on how frequently you can go out and check your counter, but something I ran across working for Park Service using these. If you have a lot of spiders, they tend to like dark places, and these electrical boxes we use as the lock boxes tend to fit the bill for them sometimes, and they can very quickly weave a web over your the hole that your eye is poking through or is looking through. So that's another one that kind of surprised me the first time we came across it, but would frequent checking and make sure whoever's checking is checking that hole for obstructions. But I've seen spider webs fairly often when you get out in the backcountry like that. So I think your main worries there are going to be the vegetation, and then any sort of animal, insect type issues. If you're in the fall, you're obviously looking to see if you've got leaves and things like that. Anything that can block your eye, that's I think a false count from vegetation and things blocking your eye. That's going to be your two main issues when you're not in a more urban environment.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. We have one question I will selfishly take. The question was, could the Weekday trail spikes that David was talking about, where there's a significant increase in usage, also indicate the time of day that people are most available for recreation or fitness uses? For example, they're not in school or at work. I just wanted to chime in. Across the river from Arlington here in D.C., we've been doing some preliminary counts on the Metropolitan Branch Trail. And what we found is that we have that morning and evening spike, which is closely correlated with morning and evening rush hours. Similar to the Custis Trail, the Metropolitan Branch Trail is primarily a transportation corridor. But we also do get a lunchtime spike. And we can't confirm this through data yet, but that's something we'd like to do through intercept surveys in the future. But our hunch is that it's corresponded to lunch break, recreation, and fitness uses by people in the neighborhoods and in the offices nearby the trail. I have another question that I'd like to pass to David. The question is, are there any plans to put in counters that give you users instant feedback? The person who asked the question says that she saw some in Copenhagen. For those who haven't seen it, it's a counter on a major bike corridor in the center of Copenhagen that gives a real-time read as you pass it by.
I do have some thoughts about that. That's a lovely device. We've priced it. It's on the order of $25,000 for this lovely sort of monolith that has a real-time readout of how many cyclists have ridden by. It's certainly worthwhile in Copenhagen. That facility carries something like 30,000 cyclists a day. So we like to see the numbers rack up. We don't have anywhere near the numbers of that. And also, Arlington sort of lacks that kind of main street. That our highest use locations are on trails. They're not next to cafes. They don't give that kind of feedback that folks might want to have a cup of coffee and watch the numbers rack up. If anybody wants to hack together a solution, I'd love to host such a thing, but we just don't have the budget for that particular kind of product.
All right. We just got in another question that I think I'd like to jump in and pose to Jennifer. does the National Bike and Pedestrian Documentation Project consider the visitor surveys that U.S. Forest Service or other state park organizations conduct on trails? This person's saying that the focus on transportation trends is valuable, but this person's also interested in general facility use to inform how to allocate resources. So the question is, does the documentation project consider Forest Service or other state park counts or user surveys? Jennifer?
Thank you. Yes, we do. We actually have not been sent National Forest Survey or count data, but we recognize that trails and parks are an important part of the community, and we do encourage folks, one, to do counts and surveys in parks, but also to send us the data. And we have not gotten that data, but we would love to consider it.
Great. Thank you so much. I have one question I'd like to send out to the group at large. This is when it comes to the automatic counters. The question is, what are the considerations and experiences when counting both trail and motor vehicle traffic simultaneously at trail road crossings? I just wanted to chime in with some experience on the trail I mentioned before, the Metropolitan Branch Trail. It runs parallel to the Metro Rail Red Line, and when we were positioning the trails, or positioning the counters rather, one of the major concerns was that we would end up picking up trains. We had a couple of false starts with our data because I think we were picking up some trains, because it's definitely a lot of movement within the site of the counter eye. But we were able to follow some advice that Eric had mentioned earlier, which included pointing the infrared counter down towards the trail, and this generally eliminated that problem. I'll open this up to Jennifer, Eric, Mel, David. Any other experiences with that issue?
I think just what you said. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to echo what you had said, Stephen, is that just you need to calibrate it so that it does not count vehicular activity or train activity if that's what you're nearby. But I also think that it's important to count at those locations so that you can understand the needs for trail users who are crossing the roadway versus how many vehicles are using the roadway. It might help you warrant some sort of crossing improvement.
Eric, did you want to add something there?
Yeah. Well, she is exactly the point I wanted to make, so I don't belabor that. But I think getting the vehicle count data for the very reason Jennifer said is important. So while you want to be careful that you're not counting the vehicles with your counter, I think some targeted count on vehicle traffic at trail crossings is very useful.
Great. I have a question here for Mel. This person's question is, how do you recruit volunteers? And how do you make sure that they're not just the usual group of folks from the bike subculture? So Mel, could you speak a little bit towards your recruiting for volunteers?
Oh, sure. Well, in our area, each of the local partners sends out information to their contacts. Most of the people are supportive of biking and walking, so they are already convinced users. We're trying to maybe get out to seniors who do walking but are not necessarily in the bike culture. But we use a lot of personal contacts, a lot of arm twisting, because in Portland so many people are volunteering for so many activities. It's hard to get people to sign up for another event because they commit to like 6 to 10 hours on this project through the training and getting to the site, setting up the site and doing the actual counts. So it's mostly through word of mouth, through our contacts, and through the internet, which we're posting. We have volunteer websites that just get anybody who's interested in being a volunteer. Does that get to the...
Yeah, I think that does help. Thank you, Mel. I had a question that I'm going to pose to David. I know he has something that he wants to show based on this question. The question is, how are you using counts in conjunction with GIS to expand analysis of your data?
Great. I don't want to do a full-fledged product demo, but what I want to share is this is a view of the data viewer that comes with the modem-enabled eco-counter equipment. And what you're seeing is aerial imagery of our location. The The yellow S's are our counters. There's actually 2 at this location. And so this is inherently geographically located information. When the counters are installed, the latitude, longitude of that location is put in as part of the counter's identity. And I just want to breeze through one little display. Oops, I need to collapse this. So let's look at the last week of data. Say, let's go. I'm going to be a little more random than that. Let's go from the 14th of March to the 20th of March, and so that's selecting our period. Let's look at the days of data. See, hours, 15 minutes, weeks. Let's look at the days. What we're seeing are the daily trace, our 4 different count locations. And you can see that at the top blue line there, we have 2,200 count events at that one location on Saturday 19th, a couple weeks ago. And these are just the totals. These are not differentiated by bikes and peds. So let's go ahead and look at that location in a little more detail. So here are the 4 different channels. That's bikes in and out and peds in and out on one day. Nope, sorry, still for the whole week. So when we do this kind of look at the data, we start to see interesting things. I'm going to turn on this other counter that is about 100 feet away. I'm going to turn off the peds for the moment and look at just bikes in and out. So here's 2 counters very close together. Again, this data is not available in real time. There's a bit of a delay before we can start to use it. And then if we look at let's go back and look at just one single day. Let's look at March 18th. Let's look at the hours now. And these kinds of peaks tell us that we have different kinds of use going on these 2 trails. This is very close to a T intersection. There are 2 trails that intersect. And one of them, I would say the blue line, the WNOD trail, is showing a very clear commuter profile, and the WNOD Bon Air trail, this orange line, is a less clear commuter profile. You don't see that morning commute peak, but you do see an afternoon, evening sort of commuter fitness peak. And this squares with what we observe when we do our volunteer count, because we have volunteers on the ground. They're seeing what people are wearing. They're seeing whether people are sort of seasoned commuters who have their heads down and they've got a briefcase on their back rack and they do this every day, versus somebody who's kind of leisurely riding along and maybe they're out for the first time that week. We haven't done a lot of this yet. We haven't a great experience with this software. It's still early days for this as an approach, but this way of viewing the data saves a great deal of time, saves a lot of field visits, lets us keep track of our equipment on practically a real-time basis, squares with what we get from volunteers, and allows kinds of analysis that we couldn't do before, and is all geographically located.
Thank you, David. We are coming up towards the end of our time together, so I want to thank everyone for your participation. Again, thank you so much. Thanks for attending. Bye-bye.